Hello everyone, my name is Brianna and I'm going to be telling you guys about general strain theory and just going over a bit of what that looks like with some examples. So what is general strain theory? So general strain theory provides a framework for understanding why individuals may resort to deviant or criminal behavior when they face stress or strain through life. It's been very influential throughout the field of criminology and criminal justice, obviously, and it obviously needs more research behind it, but the development of the theory takes into account various complexities within the relationship between strain and deviance. So, in 1938, American sociologist Robert Merton theorized that crime was caused by strain. However, there were many criticisms that came with it, such as he often ignored the role that gender and culture played in how people perceive stress. The idea has drawn criticism for being predominantly male focused or male centric and failed to significantly address the particular difficulties experienced by women and people of diverse cultural backgrounds. Another criticism was the societal values and goals. So Merton's theory was criticized because it assumed that the societal values and the objectives was under one size fits all. So basically, he was only looking at it from the stereotypical all American dream view and was assuming that's what everyone wanted and that was their goal in life, and anything outside of that strained was causing the deviancy. So it just kind of didn't fit all kinds of life. Another issue that came were due to the mixed outcomes he had from his hypothesis. After his hypotheses were challenged and theorized, the validity of his research was definitely called into question. So that is why in 1992, American criminologist Robert Agnew revised it and kind of made it into the theory that we know today. So he has a diverse strain source. He figured out that there were three different kinds of strains or three different categories that people could go through. So there's objective strain, so that is the tangible, like external events that you could go through that we'll go over later in slides. There's the subjective strain, so basically everyone has an individual perception and kind of view of what strain is and what stress is in life. And the last one is anticipated strain, so kind of future orientated stressors, things that you think are going to happen in life. Um, as well as he really touched on the emotional aspect and the coping aspect of strain. He highlighted the connections between strain and deviance and the negative emotions, especially when it came to rage and irritation and how that played into it. Merton really only looked at positive emotions when he was theorizing, so Agnew was really the one to play into all the different kinds of emotions. As well as he integrated other theories into this theory, such as the social learning theory and the social control theory. He really theorized about how they all play into each other, and even helped push those theories forward. So his addition really enhanced the way the theory is known today, and it really has an all-encompassing framework to help people understand why things like this happen. Anyway, these are the guys, these are our Robs of the general strain theory. Anyway, getting into the different kinds of strain there are in life, some studies have found that the death of a spouse, divorce or marital separation, and imprisonment can be some of the most stressful things that people could go through. But obviously, here's just a few of the main examples that can play into strain of life and just make people really stressed out. It's critical to remember that stresses differ from person to person, and the way a person has their support networks and their various coping mechanisms, whether they're positive or negative, it definitely could influence how the stress affects them. For many people, other significant stressors like serious illness, money issues, or losing their job could be enough to push them to do crime and even have like a drug dependency. When it comes to how these emotions play into the strain, it's really interesting to see how the body physically reacts to these emotions and have correlations between the strain and the deviance. So, stress and anxiety, depression, guilt and shame are all some of the big emotions, negative emotions at least, that play into deviancy and how people, experience these negative emotions. It definitely can push towards poor self esteem. So, Stress is one of those things that really damages a person's self-value and self-worth. So people definitely may become distressed in their own skills and even become helpless. Grief and loss is a huge one. I mean, deep grief can definitely trigger certain strains, and loss of people, especially significant connections with people, can severely damage someone's emotional and physical, mental well-being, really. When it comes to those aspects of poor self-esteem, social isolation is a big one. Many people, when they are feeling these aspects of depression and anxiety, they don't really want to be around people. If anyone's ever heard of being agoraphobic, that's basically that aspect when it gets pushed so far that you feel this need to stay indoors and just stay away from people. That's a very quick summary of it. It's much deeper than that, but it's really interesting to see how these emotions physically manifest into people's lives. Um, as far as also manifestations, it comes to like physical manifestations as well. I mean, has anyone's ever had like an anxiety migraine? It is insane. There's a level of exhaustion that comes with all this physical strain, and even like digestive problems. People have become lactose intolerant due to being so stressed and so upset, which is different aspects of life. So it's really interesting to see how these physical symptoms manifest in people. As stated before, many people unfortunately can turn to negative coping mechanisms to numb or even escape these unpleasant emotions. People may resort to these aspects, like substance abuse. I mean, people turn to sex, to drugs, to sugar, to food. There's so many different ways people can use different substances, quote unquote, to cope with these issues. So, here's our first example. We're going to see kind of a funny example. It's from Shameless. So we see just a little bit of background. We see Kevin and V. They are getting ready to have 4 kids. So they are biologically pregnant with triplets, and during this time they were struggling with pregnancy. So they had a surrogate that was actually successful. That is V's mother, technically. So it's really interesting to see all these kids. On top of all this, they had just bought this bar, and without realizing it was actually failing, they were just unaware, just uneducated about the stresses that were coming with owning a business, and obviously the debt that's coming with all of it. So due to all this strain, the emotions they're having, I mean, you could see, as Kevin's explaining, he's so stressed and just upset and burnt out about the system, about what is going on in their lives, about the different responsibilities he has on him. I mean, you could see the burnt outness on V's face. I mean, she's pregnant, she's having to work all these crazy hours because, I mean, the bar's failing, she has really no other option. So it's really interesting to see how these two were pushed into this idea to open an illegal brothel. So super interesting stuff. Let's go ahead and watch that real quick.
You know how we were talking about using Stan's apartment to generate some income?
Rent it out.
Or we could open up another business.
Since this one is going so well, you know how expensive it is to get a business license?
Unless we don't need one. Svetlana and her girls are out of work.
Wait a minute. Do you want to open a whorehouse?
No, of course not. It's the rub and tug. It's a massage with a happy ending.
You know what a rub and tug is?
Those girls are trained professionals, and compared to this place, it's pure profit. Baby, look, we are victims of a society that squeezes the lower middle class, screws up our businesses because of jackhammers and taxes and regulations and unnecessary paperwork, basically forces us to do illegal shit. Now I'm having 4 kids. If that means I gotta turn out some Russian whores to feed my family and pursue the American dream, that's how it's gotta be.
So moving on to our next case, and this is unfortunately a real case. We'll be talking about Edmund Kemper, also known as the co-ed killer. So a little bit of background about him. He was born in California in 1948, and he had a very troubled background. He had a very abusive mother and a dysfunctional family, and that could definitely be a source of his strain. His parents were divorced, and they were very abusive towards him. So definitely contributed to his early life strain. His mom did not give him love or affection, as he stated. She didn't want him to quote-unquote turning out gay for some reason, so she was just very cold and distant towards him all his entire life growing up. But he wasn't he was only being centered out. Like his other siblings, he had 2 other sisters, and the mom was completely normal towards them, showed them love, gave them affection, but just not towards him. As far as his early criminal behavior, Edmund Kemper had many early criminal acts, but his worst ones were in 1964 when, at the age of 15, after being sent by his mother to go live with them, he shot and killed both of his maternal grandparents. Now, keep in mind, at the age of 15, he was 6'4" and he was 250 pounds. He stated that he murdered his grandparents to express his frustration and anger in life and just to see what it felt like. So he was definitely going through something mentally. So when it comes to mental health and his diagnoses, he has a very lengthy psychiatric history, and this includes a diagnosis for paranoid schizophrenia. This came after he was arrested for the 2 murders. When he was arrested, though, he was given an evaluation, obviously, and that included an IQ test. And it was found out that he had an IQ of 140, which is pretty high. The average American score is around 100. So he definitely was smarter than the average human, but he obviously was going through a lot with the paranoid schizophrenia diagnosis. He was released from that mental institution at the age of 21, and at the age of 22, he tried to join the police force. It's very interesting to see that he couldn't become a cop, not due to his paranoid schizophrenia diagnosis or his, 2 first-degree murder convictions, basically, at an early age. It was because he met the Santa Cruz Police Department's height requirement. So at 22 years old, he was 6'9" and about 300 pounds. And you could kind of see in the picture behind right here, he is a very big man. But he was pretty upset about this. This was another thing that is thought to contribute to his strain in life, this rejection from the police force. But he still hung out at all the bars where the police were, and he even had a reputation and was known as Big Ed by the Santa Cruz Police Department. And just, it was really interesting to see how he kind of joined the clique, even though he was a murderer. So when it comes to his crimes, he targeted young women, often college students, and he would pick up hitchhikers. And from 1972 to 1973, he murdered 10 people. This included 6 young women. That's how he got the nickname the co-ed killer, his mother, and his mother's friend. His youngest victim was 15 years old, and most of his murders included necrophilia, decapitation, and dismemberment due to the power struggle and dynamic he had towards his strain of relationship towards women. And we'll see that in the video example in a few minutes. He had a very serious issue when it came to women and his relationships, and it's even theorized that he was a cannibal, but this was never able to be confirmed, unfortunately. When it comes to his mother's murder, he didn't just murder her. I mean, he completely bludgeoned her. He dismembered her after bludgeoning her with a hammer and then sexually assaulted her head. Severed and decapitated her head and then forced himself to have oral sex with her head. And then after all of this, he used his mother's head as a dartboard, before murdering her best friend. So after these murders, he eventually said he snapped out of it and realized what he had done. So, stopping only for soda and for gas, according to him, he drove 18 hours here to Colorado and turned himself into the police in Pueblo, Colorado after the murder. He showed this level of remorse, being that he drove this far and had all this time to think about it, but he had a very strong desire to end his criminal behavior, according to him. He confessed to the investigators what happened and even went and showed them where the evidence was of all the murders. He cooperated fairly well with the FBI profilers, and they definitely saw insight into him behind his motivations due to him having such a high IQ and the different strains he went through in life. On May 7, 1973, though, he was indicted on 8 counts of first-degree murder and was sentenced to life in prison. He is currently incarcerated in a California medical facility, and he has been denied for parole 8 different times. The last time he was denied was in 2017, and he's eligible for parole next in 2024. I believe where I read it was in May. He most likely will be denied again, but it's just really interesting to think that he's still alive, and just because you are shown to be highly intelligent, you could go through a lot of different stuff in life that could unfortunately push you to do stuff like this. That doesn't explain why he did it, but it's really unfortunate to see what happened. Anyway, let's get into the example and watch the video.
My mother was a sick, angry, hungry, and very sad woman. I hated her, but I wanted to love my mother. And I watched the alcohol increase. I watched her social life drop off. I watched her get bizarre. She had terrible pain from her life, earlier life, her upbringing, a failed marriage with my father. I'm a constant reminder of that failure. I hate to distill it down into such into one-word realities like that. There's a lot that leads into that happening, but that is what happened. They represented not what my mother was, but what she liked, what she coveted, what was important to her, and I was destroying it.
Why did you actually kill the girls?
My frustration, my inability to communicate socially, sexually. I wasn't impotent, but emotionally I was impotent. I was scared to death of failing in male-female relationships.
So what are some things that can be done about this? There are two main categories that are often talked about when it comes to finding solutions about general strain theory. The first is social support and community-based interventions, such as mentorship programs that could definitely help with positive role models within people, and it will definitely help at-risk individuals, particularly youth, find people to connect with. There's a lot of conflict resolution and anger management training that can be offered towards people that really need it to help them resolve their issues and their strains without needing violence or deviance. Community policing is a big one. There's a lot of strategies that could be done to build trust between law enforcement and the communities, and this will likely stop strain from happening and stemming from negative interactions with the police and people. A positive social safety net is a big one, and having a support system can definitely help with issues such as unemployment, fooding assistance, like if you're having a hard time because you lost your job and you're about to get out of your house. Having that support system of family and friends to be able to help you through that situation is a huge one. When it comes to mental health and well-being, obviously offering mental health services and increasing access to these services, such as counseling, therapy, and psychiatric care to address both the emotional and psychological strain. Substance abuse treatment, addressing these different kinds of abuse and how addiction works within people. This could definitely be a source of strain, and as we said before, people turn to drug addiction to help cope with these strains and emotions. So helping these people find healthy coping mechanisms could be a huge thing. Early intervention is a huge one also, identifying individuals at risk of experiencing pain, emotional strain, and overall health-related issues can definitely provide support where is needed, especially when it comes to children and adolescents. There needs to be a huge early intervention campaign when it comes to mental and substance abuse treatment. There also just needs to be a reduction in stigma. There's a lot of stigma associated with seeking help within these issues when experiencing strain in life. So definitely stopping that stigmatization within society about people reaching out and, suffering in silence when it comes to strain, because we see what happens when people don't properly get the correct medical help. And lastly, education and skill building, enhancing both the educational trainings and within communities can definitely help individuals develop these skills to combat this strain and kind of have the language to be able to speak up about it, and also have the knowledge to know how to improve their situation, whether it's, financial, emotional, psychological, to be able to take these steps forward to be able to help themselves. However, these are all my resources. There are quite a few. Oh my goodness, I did way too many. Now, to finish it off, I would like you to think about these different discussion questions compared to the Ed Kemper case. It's a really interesting case, and we only scratched the surface of the background and kind of what happened. He has a lot of documentation out there on the internet of interviews, and it's really interesting to see him speak so intelligently, but to also know what he's done is just really interesting. So just a few questions to go over. Anyway, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate you all listening. Again, my name is Brianna, and I hope you learned something about general strain theory today.